Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. Today, we're going to delve into wild yoga. And we're going to do that against the backdrop of the Copernican revolution of our time. And that is the shift in human consciousness from a point of view and a framework in which humanity is separate from nature to a worldview in which humanity is integral in nature and, in fact, is nature. Me talking to you right now is nature speaking. You watching this broadcast of Humanity Rising is nature watching. And our failure to understand that is at the heart of our global predicament. I pointed out previously that Carl Jung, when he did his psychoanalysis of the collapse of Europe in World War I and World War II, he said, in the end, the basic issue, the basic problem was that nature had been relegated as a separate category of being, and the urban masses cut off from nature became susceptible to demagogues and crazy ideologies that wreaked havoc in the 20th century. More people were killed in the 20th century on the altar of ideology and our disconnection with nature than all previous human history combined. And if you just take that in for a moment, one gets a sense of the cost of separation, the catastrophic cost of this illusion that somehow we're separate from everything that is. And in fact, there's a new category evolved over the last 20 years or so called nature deficit disorder, as more and more young people in particular live their lives in vast cosmopolitan megalopolises like Sao Paulo or Mexico City, Tokyo, New York, other places around the world that are just the size of countries, and people live their whole lives in concrete. And that has an effect. And the effect is with us as less and less do young people go outside, play outdoors, because they're spending their time on computers, on social media. And the cost there for and thereby of alienation, loneliness, depression, anxiety is commensurate with our lack of connection with nature itself. Or one could say nature herself, because nature is our great mother and we are her children. So today we're going to explore yoga in the wild from a woman who is deeply immersed in nature and has spent most of her professional life leading people into natural environs and has developed a whole practice of wild yoga. But before we delve into that delectable feast, let us pause, as we always do on Humanity Rising, in our crazy world, and just simply breathe together. Consciously, coherently breathe. One of the most important things any of us can do is just engage in daily practice of conscious breathing. So in a moment, you'll hear the sound of a bell. When you hear that bell, breathe in. And then you'll hear another bell and breathe out. We'll take 10 breaths together, and then we'll begin our program. Thank you, everyone. welcome to Humanity Rising. Thank you, everyone. Wild yoga. It's my pleasure now to introduce Rebecca Wildbear, who has been leading wild yoga programs through the Animas Valley Institute since 2007. She's written a book called Wild Yoga and is a practitioner. She lives in one of these tiny houses, 300 square feet in Colorado. So she walks her talk as a wild yogi. So Rebecca, I'm totally pleased to have gotten to know you through Humanity Rising and my connection with Animas Institute. And it's a real pleasure to have you on our program today. So tell us about wild yoga.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much for that introduction and the breathing. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this program and everything that you're doing. I've looked on at the web and seen what you're up to, and so glad I could join in this conversation that you're in. And I'm glad to bring you some wild yoga. Here is my book, so you can see what we're coming from. I just got published in February, so it's out new, but it is based on my life in the wilderness mostly. The last 2 to 3 decades in the wilderness. Just to give you a little bit about my background and where the book comes from, is I did work in the public school system as a school counselor in my early 20s, right out of graduate school, having my master's in counseling. But I worked in the summers for Outward Bound, in wanting to be in the wilderness as much as possible. And soon, I say, the wilderness just claimed me full time, and I had to leave the cinder block walls of the school system and head out into the wilderness full time. And one of my long-standing professions was as a wilderness therapist for 15 years. But I also have been working with Animas Valley since 2007. Before that, if you count the six or 7 years of study before I became a guide. And also, alongside the same time as I started as a guide with Animas, I started my own programs called Wild Yoga. And there's actually a lot of things in common with what Animas Valley Institute does and what Wild Yoga does, if you're familiar with the work of Animas. So some of that will be included in Wild Yoga. Wild Yoga is bigger in scope and broader in scope, and Animas is very focused on the soul journey. And Wild Yoga includes the soul journey, but it also includes some other aspects. So we'll go through the whole thing. But I want to just start by just welcoming you into the world of wild yoga. Whereas Bill calls his work, he has very particular models about human growth and development and a pathway that you go on. The approach that I take through wild yoga is a bit different because we go through practices. So there's not exactly a path, but there is a whole variety of practices. And so there can be, and some variation in the particular way that you go about those practices. But I do set them in an order in the book, starting out slowly and gently. One of my missions in writing the book was to make it accessible to anyone, so that there isn't anyone who couldn't pick up this book in the first chapter, read it, and begin to dive into the practices. But there is a steep learning curve throughout the 18 chapters and 18 practices. We do go pretty far, pretty deep to some really wild and unusual places that are pretty different from where, the dominant culture directs us. And so I do recommend to people to, go at your own pace. And sometimes you can stick with the first chapters and then spend a long time in there before going on. But today, because I have this time with you to introduce wild yoga, I'm going to try to take you through the whole thing so you get a chance and a flavor of what it would be like to go on the whole journey. I'm going to start out, though, with trees. As you'll see if you read my book, trees are just one of my absolute, and forests are just one of my absolute favorite beings in the whole world. I actually posit later in chapter 17, towards the end of the book, what if the consciousness of trees are quite a bit higher than the consciousness of humans? And we just don't know because we can't speak tree language, we can't hear. There are signs that trees are more intelligent, that the ways that they take care of each other, the ways that they take care of the sick trees, the young trees, even the stumps that are dead, the way they send their nutrients out to everyone, the way the mother tree, even when it dies, sends all its nutrition out to the forest, the way they tend the whole, the way they tend beings that are even not even trees, all the other creatures and animals, the mycelium, the insects, the birds, the animals, the way the soil lives through them. So they're contributing, and even us, we wouldn't live without trees. They give us oxygen. We need that to breathe. Maybe our climate wouldn't allow us to be here if it wasn't for trees. So I just want to start by a welcoming of trees, and I'm just going to read a little bit from my chapter 5 in my book, which is called "Receive the Love of Trees," because it seems like any practice really needs to be grounded in love, and yet love is sometimes the thing that seems most bereft from all of us, depending how we were raised, whatever challenges that we might have. There is ways that we sometimes feel that we don't have enough love, or that we're not able to give love to others as well as we'd like, or we can't give it to ourselves, that somehow we're starving or suffocating without that. And trees, to me, speaking of their higher consciousness, and this is not only just academic study, but this is the way I've experienced them the last couple of decades out in the field. And I've spent a long time sleeping under them, communing with them, and yes, even talking to them. And even without words, my body has a very visceral conversation with trees, in that when I lean my back against them or I lay on the forest floor, my consciousness and my whole body is altered by being in their presence. I think sometimes, just like we choose the human presences that we're in company with, like perhaps you all are choosing here, to raise your consciousness and listen and be in a great conversation. When I'm in the consciousness and presence of trees, I'm in a great conversation. And it might have words in it, but it doesn't always need words, because there's actually some exchange happening between my body and the trees. Sometimes I wonder why, I always ask people to wonder why do we like to go to nature? Even people that don't have conversations with nature, that just like to go there. So many people like to go to nature. My sense is that somehow, in the presence of nature, trees included, when beings are so fully and utterly themselves in their beauty and magnificence and majesticness and intelligence, that we're pulled more into also being more fully who we are and our best selves too. Here's some words about trees from the beginning of Receive the Love of Trees. I embrace a giant ponderosa pine overlooking the Utah desert and breathe in the scent of butterscotch. As I climb and reach for the next branch, the rough texture of my trunk touches my skin. I want to feel close to trees like I did when I was young. Pausing, I wrap my arms around the tree and tuck my nose into the bark. I feel nourished and am transported back in time. As a child, I lived in trees. The giant ash tree rising well over 100 feet in my backyard was the center of my world. Down the hill in a grove of pines, I played in pine needles, sometimes climbing to the tippy top of a tree, arms wrapped around the thin tip, the weight of my body gently swaying from side to side. In summer, I crawled out on the further branches of the cherry tree, eating more fruit than made it into my basket for Mom's pie. The maple tree in the front yard is where I went to hide. Behind walls of leaves, I could see all and no one could find me. Before anyone taught me otherwise, I sensed trees had feelings and inner lives. I knew they were living beings with whom to relate. They looked after me. I felt like they could sense what was happening inside me more than other humans could. They seemed to understand the secret wounds and traumas of my childhoods, the ones my mind did not remember or know how to bear. I felt terrible sometimes, but I didn't know why. The humans around me acted like things were fine, but something felt wrong. I didn't know what it was or how to talk about it. But whenever I was in the trees, I sensed they understood me. As a child, I turned to the smell of pine and bark instead of human skin or voice when I hurt. I climbed in the branches of these elders to be held again and again. I trusted their love and wisdom. They nurtured me. So I hope that perhaps that my reading about trees in childhood could maybe begin to carry you and transport you back into time, into your own childhood, into your relationship with trees or your relationship with nature, and how the natural world and you connected, how there was an exchange or a love or a joy or an innocence from being in that relationship. One of the aspects of wild yoga is taking us back to that beginning, to that simplistic relationship that's quite complex between our bodies and the earth. And as Jim mentioned earlier when he introduced us, our bodies are wildness. Our bodies are part of wildness. That's one reason I love to begin the book with the very first chapter, listen to the intelligence of your body, because we need to go no further than looking down at this wild animal creature that we're all inhabiting for this life, and this wild-hearted being that we carry around in us that has all sorts of feelings and yearnings, to see our wildness. And so we're going to dive in a moment to the first part of the book Wild Yoga, which is about why it's called Wild. It's about all the practices that it might take to rewild ourselves. But before we do, I just want to give you a little bit more about the scope of the whole book and the intention. I almost didn't call the book Wild Yoga. I almost didn't use the word yoga because of the way that yoga is understood as a connotation in our culture, in a way that's more narrow and limited. In Western culture today, when you hear the word yoga, you think only of asana practice. That's usually what it means. I'm going to a yoga class, an asana practice class. And I do love asana practice, and I do believe it is totally valuable. And at the end of every one of my chapters, I do include a yoga asana pose with very many variations, bringing in wildness and the deep imagination. So I absolutely am in great support of asana, But I do believe that in the context of what the deeper, more ancient and full meaning of yoga is that it is only one branch in the tree of yoga. Asana practice and movements in our body help us come into our animal nature. That's why a lot of the original yogis named the poses after animals. We're trying to take these shapes and movements that, bring us back, because it's so hard in humans that we can be in so many different places at once. I love David White's quote, human beings are the only humans on the planet privileged enough to prevent their own flowering. There's a way that when we go out into nature, it's fully itself. A rock is a rock and a tree is a tree. There's no confusion. And we have these minds that allow us to be so many different things and hear so many different voices that can sometimes be hard to know, what's the true voice? Who am I really? And coming back into our bodies and these animal poses is one way to come back into the truth of our animal nature that's rooted in the earth. So it's one very important branch on the tree. But yoga itself is a whole tree, and the whole tree itself has a much bigger context. It's always been about union. It's been about relationship. It's been about shifting of consciousness. It's been about finding oneself and taking a journey that is very personal, to discover your purpose and what you're here for, and also to discover the world. Who am I and who is the world? And what is our relationship? What is my relationship? What is mine to offer in this world? And so in my book, Wild Yoga, I'm really taking the context of yoga back. And that's why I wanted to use the word yoga, because I wanted to reinvigorate it with the power that it was always meant to have, that it's about coming back into these larger relationships. In many ways, you could say my entire book is all about relationships. And not only just ordinary relationships that we might think of in the dominant culture as relationships with other humans, but a much bigger scope of relationships, more mysterious relationships that are actually resources to us that we didn't know. And a lot of it comes through listening. And that's a context that's hard to understand in our culture, because a lot is focused on action. I know in most spiritual practices, there's a context of contemplation and action. And I do bring that into the practice of wild yoga, but I also bring that into the practice in a way where there's a much more heavy influence on listening itself. That action is important and we don't want to leave action out, but that what would it be like if our actions came from a much deeper listening that was sourced in our relationship with all these others? So that's some of the scope of wild yoga. And I wanted to start there, but I do want to take you into to just, the whole scan of the whole book, which has 3 focuses. The first section is all about wild. It's all about rewilding ourselves. It's coming back into relationship with our wild nature, which is so needed in these times where we're raised away from nature. As Jim already mentioned, the nature deficit disorder. How do we come back into relationship with nature? And in many ways, it's a remembering, because our ancestors of all cultures were rooted in a relationship with the earth. They lived close to the earth, had ceremony with the earth, and even talked to nature. But in our Western culture, we're raised so very differently than that. So how do we reestablish and reawaken this inherent natural relationship that we're meant as humans to have? And then the second section that I go to, part 2 of the book, is called Holy Longing. And it's about the soul journey down, which is Animus's focus, and the spirit journey as well. And how do they relate and carry us on into a much deeper sense of ourself and relationship? And then the third section of the book is called Beloved World. And this is where we come back to the world. Sometimes when we go on soul and spirit journeys, we can become so lost in them, either through the challenges and darknesses that arise to pull us down indefinitely, or sometimes just through the joys of being in the other worlds, that we could just want to stay in them and not come back to this, to also include this physical plane of the earth, and how I might deal with everyday challenges, politics and relationships and neighborhood and community. And so In Beloved World, I bring us back to how do we be in relationship with all the worlds, given what we've received in the journey and given the challenges in the world right now at this moment. So I take us through all those contexts, and I'll go through them just a little bit, so you get a sense of the whole thing. As I said in the first chapter, I start with listening to the intelligence of the body, because it really does start with coming back to the body. I'm so glad that we started today with breathing practice to come back into the body. When there's fear or trauma or just being raised differently, it can be hard to do that. And sometimes what lives in our body can even be hard to face or even hard to access. So there's practices that I include in my book, just, very basic ones, like what is it like to just come back into the animal body and lie on your yoga mat and lie still until you want to move from a place of intrinsic motivation, not force of your mind or not have to. What would it be like to find that source of authentic movement and stillness? And I also, even in the first chapter, begin to bring in our relationship with nature. As you'll see, all of the practices in wild yoga are very wild and very connected to nature. In my impression, the trees are in yoga asana, their branches and their shapes, moved by wind and weather. They strike a pose, and sometimes their pose changes, although far less frequently than humans. And we can watch their poses, or even the way that they might change in a storm or the wind or the weather or the cold. There's tree pose. Sometimes we can get into tree pose and connect ourselves through the roots in the ground and imaginary branches coming out of our head and our shoulders into the sky, and imagine what it would be like to be rooted in such a community as them. So if we watch nature in its asana and how beautiful it is, sometimes there's a way that we can do yoga asana that's very different from the way that we might do it in mainstream culture as an exercise or just to move quickly. There can be value to that. But in wild yoga, my sense is to take us back to our intrinsic, authentic movement through our wild bodies, our wild animal nature. And sometimes that involves particular flows or particular poses to find that. But the ultimate yoga is moving naturally as our bodies want to, and just even being present with them. What is it like to intentionally take your energy out of your head and bring it down to your lungs and your heart and down to your belly and down to your feet? So we do a lot of those practices and listening to the body. In the second chapter of Wild Yoga, we go through into a practice called deepen your ecological perception. And that's hard, when I say talk to nature. That's a lot of the culture doesn't believe that that's possible, but I do talk to nature and I listen to nature and I do receive messages, and I'm so grateful because the intelligence of the natural world is so much greater than my mind by itself. I would be pretty lost if I had to rely just on my mind or just on what the culture taught me or just on what other people are doing or what other people asked me to do or expected or what I need to do to survive. Some of those things can be important, but what the natural world tells me in scope is so much bigger and more important in being directed. I opened the book, Deepen Your Ecological Perception, with my first quest, which was with Animas Valley Institute when I was 20 years ago. And being in a canyon, asking, what is the purpose of my life? And being high on a rock bluff in a canyon, in an ancient canyon, not eating for several days and nights, fasting, listening. People that fast, I lead quests now, are usually so hungry to listen to nature that they want to enter into that more extreme ceremony so that they can hear. And fasting helps weaken the ego, so our minds can stop being as busy and we might have a chance of slowing down enough to hear nature, to hear the natural world around us. Like I did on the quest, I heard a glimmer, a possible glimmer, and there were going to be so many pieces afterwards, which I do share many of in my book. But we're in chapter 2 now, and I share just a glimmer of my soul, a name which came to me on the final day when I was the weakest, Braveheart, which was very connected to my cancer journey, which I also talk about in my book, which was kind of a first soul encounter because it was an encounter with death. Death often brings us to our knees, just the possibility of it. to encounter soul, which, can often give us a glimmer of why we're here. Many people encounter soul on their deathbed, but then if you are about to die, then you miss the opportunity to live your soul. And when you can actively be in a moment where you might be close to death, but then still get to come back, you get a glimmer of why you're here, and then you get to live that for the rest of your life. So Braveheart was a glimmer of the name I got, and there's so many pieces of that. But I can promise you that 20 years later, now I certainly wouldn't be here on this podcast talking to you if I hadn't lived Braveheart into the world. I've always been quite shy and quiet. So it's taken all these years to have the courage to write a book, to be a guide, and to be able to speak, to find my voice. So I'm so grateful for the glimmer I got and the time it took to live that into the world. But, even if you're not going on a quest right away or at all, in my chapter, Deepen Your Ecological Perception, I do go through basic practices step by step for how we can deepen our connection to the world, just little by little, even going out to nature for 15 minutes or for an afternoon or for a walk. How do I begin to take my attention into the natural world? I'll give you a hint. You leave your podcasts, you leave your Walkman, your iPod, whatever we call it now these days. We leave that in the car, and we allow ourselves to be free and clear to listen to the non-human world, to the animate natural world. And we begin to look and pay attention to what we see out there, to the world out there, and what the ants might feel and the birds might sing, and the little animals that come along, the squirrels, and the chipmunks, what their movements might be like, what the river flow is like. Right now here in Mancos, Colorado, where I am, the river flow is so beautiful and high. It's snow melt off the mountains. So we just, pay attention, and it moves on from there. I move through about 6 steps and ultimately open into our imagination, which is a very powerful tool. And we really can't do many of the practices of wild yoga, including Deepen Your Ecological Perception, without the imagination. It's so powerful and so underrated in our culture. A lot of times we're taught in kindergarten that, we should put our imagination aside for more academic learnings. But our imagination is key to knowing, just as key as thinking, feeling, sensing. And to have a conversation with the natural world, we most certainly need our imaginations. And the deep imagination is even better. That's where images, feelings, words, sensations arise unbidden and surprise us. They're not things that our mind would normally think of. And we can tell that because we're surprised. Oh my gosh, where did that image come from? Where did that dream come from? Where did, that combination of words or an idea come from? So we open ourselves to possibly receiving these messages in the natural world. And ultimately, if we court a relationship, and by court, I mean take the time it takes to try and possibly fail many times before we hear, to go out and give our full-bodied presence and keep asking, keep listening, keep going towards our heart, what our heart longs for, and it will happen. So key to all the practices in this book are deepening our ecological perception. In chapter 3, I go into the heart. Flow in the river of your heart waters. A lot of times, because of the way we've been raised, because of all the traumas of our culture, our hearts have been frozen, and it needed to happen that way to survive. If our hearts were really as full and sensitive as they really are as children and open all the time, it would have been devastating. So some part of us toughened up and grew some walls to keep out the hurt and protect us. But that also shuts down us from being awake and fully embodied in our wildness. Our heart is one of the wildest creaturely parts of our body. As Joanna Macy says, when we look at ecological devastation and all the things happening to our planet, the deadening of our heart could be one of the biggest, worst, most traumatic outcomes that can keep us stuck of anything. So a practice of flowing in our heart is key. And rivers, I say flowing in our heart, rivers have been key to me in that relationship. I've trained and apprenticed as a river guide for many years and taken people down many rivers. And oh my goodness, the fear of going down sometimes rapids, and the peace and tranquility of being in beautiful canyons on flat waters and feeling the scope of the fullness of the way the earth's veins and arteries flow, and the heartbreak of seeing the ways they get toxins are put in them, or their water is confiscated for other purposes, human purposes, has been heartbreaking. So the rivers have definitely taken me into my joys and my heartbreaks more than anything. And they also help me stay connected to my heart. I believe what's happening to the earth is a mirror of what's happening in our own hearts. When the dams of the earth are put into place, and concrete is stopped water from flowing naturally, similar kinds of concrete structures can get put into our hearts that stop us from flowing. And when we free dams in the physical world and let them go, like the Elwha Dam story, which I love, of rivers returning to their natural state, we're allowing the wildness to come back. And when we do that in our own self, when we free our blood and our heart and allow our joys and sorrows and our emotions to run freely, we bring ourselves back into balance, and therefore have the power more to bring the earth back into balance too. One of the themes throughout wild yoga is that the health of the earth and the health of the human are so interconnected that we can't really look at one separate from the other, that our health and well-being, we can help ourselves heal and whole to a certain level, but if the earth is hurting, so are we. And we can help the earth too, but to do that, we need to be in balance as well. So they're a both and. So as we flow in the heart of our river, we breathe our heart back to life, which allows everything else. And then we move into chapter 4, one of my favorite chapters, feral female ferocity. And this is a very complex topic to talk about all in itself, but I'll try to be succinct. A lot of times I've worked with clients one-on-one my whole life, and also the hardest client of all, myself. And anger is often looked at so negatively in our culture, and with good reason, because violence and anger have reaped a lot of devastation on women and all sorts of peoples, the planet over. Anger and violence have really caused a lot of harm. But I think that one thing that we don't see is that there's also a natural response in us, a response of ferocity, of anger, that comes out of a desire to protect, a desire to fight back, a desire to stop the harm, a desire that says, no, this isn't okay, and no, this isn't right. And in our culture, we're often taught to silence that voice and to just, kind of go along and be peaceful about it. It might not be so good, but what can we do? And feral female ferocity is a practice to try and actually say, no, that's not healthy. The healthy response sometimes is anger, is outrage, is ferocity, is standing up, is protecting what we love, whether it's setting our boundaries and protecting ourselves from harm, or acknowledging the harm that's happening to others that we love, humans or non-humans. And it certainly is protecting our land base. It was a lot easier, I think, maybe not easier, but it made sense a long time ago to protect your land base when you had a land base, when humans lived on a particular land as a community, and they would, want to stop the harm of the community that was their ancestral land. And that is still going on today by indigenous peoples. And a lot of us have been raised, like myself, in suburbs and, not necessarily attached to a land. So how do we protect our land base? I think at this point, protecting our land base in any way we can is a great way to go. And also teaming up with indigenous people and helping them and supporting them and protecting their ancestral lands. But finding that feral female ferocity in us. And I say female because I want us to connect to that desire to protect that is animal. Like if you look at scorpions or snakes, they're very little beings, low on the food chain, and yet they don't submit to the structural hierarchy. They protect themselves. They honor their boundaries. They're fierce. And no matter how small we are or how disempowered we might feel, there's all of us that can access that natural ferocity that is part of our healing and our health. And that's what we do in feral female ferocity. And in that, we also are connecting to the power imbalances that exist in our dominant culture and allowing ourselves to feel about that. So calling that in. I read a little bit about chapter 5, Receive the Love of Trees. So we called that in by my reading a little bit, but I'll say a little bit more. Again, it's hard to do anything without love. It's hard to go anywhere. It's hard to have any motivation. It's hard to move forward. It's hard to get up in the morning, isn't it, without love? And the trees are a fountain of love. At least that's how I've experienced them. A fountain of love. I often wonder how nature can be so utterly generous with us humans, despite what is happening in the world, despite what humanity is doing. But I have found, regardless, humanity is that. It is generous. I have gone out to trees and rarely have I had an experience where one just wasn't loving. That's just their nature. So, you know, we need to be with the trees. We need to go out there. I would say cultivating this capacity for love was one of the biggest roadblocks in my own journey. And so for years, I went out to trees several times a week and I put my back against them and I listened to them and I said, please help me love myself. Please help me. I'm stuck. Please help me go forward. And there's lots of practices and Receive the Love of Trees to help everybody, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, to help reparent yourself, to source yourself in this nature's love, to root yourself as part of the forest. I think humans and trees were once meant to be far more connected than they are, to allow, you know, ourselves to be almost from an umbilicalist to the forest world. In the final chapter of the wild section, Rewilding Ourselves, we go to dreaming in the cave womb. So this is also back to the imaginal. The dream world is the imaginal world. The dream is happening all the time, whether we're awake or asleep. But I know when I first started the journey, listening to my nighttime dreams when I was asleep, when my mind was completely turned off, was the easiest way to enter the deep imagination. Somehow I could trust the images that came when my mind was turned off, even if they were scary or didn't make sense, that somehow they were from somewhere, some other world, some other place of wisdom, and that I needed to listen to them. And I was so curious. I've been curious my whole life about dreams, and you know, it hasn't stopped. Even now, I still receive new information every night in my dream, and I'm ever curious about where it might be guiding me. It's a huge source of guidance for me. And it was a way I received my mythos, other parts of my soul image that helps source me and how to live in the world. And it's a major way that I work with clients in the wilderness at Animus and wild yoga, and with my individual clients, is listening to dreams. They really help guide us, and they really help initiate us into listening to the deep imagination. If we're quiet and still enough, the dream can emerge even during the day, especially maybe if we're out in nature, where images can just come through at any point. I call my chapter Dream in the Cave Womb because, again, I like to bring the feminine in into these studies, into these practices. In a way, a lot of these practices of listening, I deem archetypally feminine. Feel free to agree or disagree, but I believe that there are certain energies, and there always have been, yin and yang, that are archetypally feminine, just as archetypally masculine. And I believe there's sacred, healthy feminine and sacred, healthy masculine energies that are both so needed in the world. And this book brings in both, but I like to, we're definitely more steeped in the archetypal feminine practices, the listening, and dreaming is key to that. The cave womb, it's gestational. It's where we listen and incubate and allow ourselves to be transformed by the images that come. Can I be reborn, reinitiated, as the dream wants me, into a deeper sense of myself, who I'm called to be, who the dream wants me to be, who the earth wants me to be. So as we went into those practices, those 6 practices, all in the wild section, we come back into a healthy sense of ourselves, into a rewilded sense of our human bodies, our wild bodies, in deep relationship, not at all separate from the earth's body. And we're sourced in this intelligence of these relationships with the dreams and the nature and body and our hearts and anger, that we're able to operate from a more whole and intelligent place. And as I mentioned in the dreaming and also in ferocity a little bit, that there's these images that can come, and mentioned in chapter 2, Braveheart, there's these images that can come that help source us in our soul or our deepest purpose, the poem or myth that we're here to live. And as I enter into holy longing, I take us deeper into that conversation, which is definitely a conversation I've learned a lot through Bill's models, which are very so particular and detailed about what the journey of soul can be, take us deep down into the underworld, into this place where we can let go of the ego, our first adulthood, who we thought we were supposed to be, and listen and come back to life, born true to our more authentic place in the world, one sourced in our deep belonging in our relationship with the earth. In my chapter, Holy Longing, I invite us too to go on the soul journey, but also to stay connected to the spirit journey too. The spirit journey is one that connects us to the totality, and the underworld and soul and the natural world are all parts of that totality. But the totality includes multiple worlds that we might not even fully understand, all of them, but we allow ourselves to be in relationship and in connection with the possibilities that can come through us. And also, the natural world is part of the spiritual. It is part of the spiritual. I'm so heartbroken that in many religions it gets separate. Spirit and physical are separate. No, the sacred is in our body. The sacred is in the earth. I'm a nature mystic at heart and always have been since I was a child. The natural world is the deepest sense of my spirituality and where my relationship with soul comes. And there's multiple other worlds too, but it's a love affair and a spiritual relation. And when we enter this spiritual relationship, the possibilities and the worlds and the relationships that we can have are so much more complex than I could cover in this time. But here, as we enter this holy longing, we open ourselves up to this whole world of conversation. It is very different from the Catholic Church, how I was raised, where it was the priests and the people in charge that gave me this relationship with the holy. No. In wild yoga, I open us up to the idea of a mystical, unmediated, direct relationship with the holy. We can all have it. Humans had it. Our ancestors had it with the earth and the spirit world all the time. And it's accessible to all of us. It takes time and courting, as anything worthy does, but it's totally worthwhile. As we go deeper into holy longing, the next chapter is romancing the mystery of what you love, which is key. What you love, following what you love. Some people talk about it as projection or shadow, falling in love with another human, all the things that get opened. But we can fall in love with another human and the qualities in another human and what the possibility of that life can bring to us. Which isn't always about getting together with that other human. Sometimes in our culture, a lot of times it's mistaken as that's the ultimate, as we could fall in love with this other human and then we could just get with them. Well, that's wonderful, and I'm all for that. But a lot of times, when we get with them, we find that they're quite different than our original sense, and that's because sometimes the original sense is connected to our inner beloved relationship and the inner romance that's meant to happen. I call it the romance of our lives, and pull us into being who we really are. When we follow the mystery of what we love, we come to be who we really are. It's a trail path. It's one of the greatest paths, and it's dangerous, because we fall in love with things that are terrifying and that ask more of us and therefore ask us to grow. And have you ever noticed that falling in love gives you the motivation to be stronger than you've ever been before? I know it has for me, whether it's with another human or when I fell in love with whitewater rafting, I got brave enough to guide boats down rapids. Or when I fell in love with soul guiding, I got brave enough to talk about what I love in front of a group, or brave enough to let go of my life so that I could become who the mystery wanted me to be. Or when I fell in love with writing, I got brave enough to write a book. When I fell in love with earth activists, I got brave enough to speak for the earth. So when we fall in love, we become who we are. And it's a wonderful romance. And it's not about acquiring anyone. It's about becoming someone, yourself. Also, As we go down into holy longing, embrace grief and despair is the next chapter. Well, if we fall in love, we can't help but fall into grief, because what we love will take us into our deepest grief. And certainly I can say, if we love the earth, it will take us into our deepest grief. You know, if you're in love with somebody, another human, and you see that they're suffering or being harmed or being hurt or dying, or, you know, just in any way not as strong as they could be, suffering in some way, our heart breaks. And I can tell you for sure, watching the wild world being harmed, having such a deep relationship with it, it breaks my heart. It's hard to stay present with all of the harm. It's so hard to see and be with. I have to be sometimes with the whole and wild places so I can feel the joy of the wilderness, but I also feel a call to be present with the places too that have been lost or suffering. Even the wild places underneath cities, they were wild once too. What about the wilderness that once lived there before the mine was there or the dam that was put in? We can shift our consciousness to be present to those ones, to feel the grief. The earth needs us to be present to earth grief. A lot of times we wonder, why are these emotions arising? And sometimes we can feel self-blame if we feel shame or depression or sadness or anger, like, why am I feeling such negative feelings? Sometimes I feel like some of those feelings are coming from the earth through us, a part of earth grief, and that there's nothing wrong with us for feeling this, um, because it's just natural given the place that we are in the world. And part of feeling it is being with her, is loving her. And there's a lot of practices where I take us into earth grief. It's part of our journey in the holy longing. And there's 3 more chapters in holy longing. I'm going to speed through a little bit more. You can read the book to go into more detail. But make a pearl of your vulnerability is about our vulnerability as our gift, our personal vulnerability. There's a way each of us were hurt, and we built protection around ever feeling it. But when we resource ourselves in all these relationships and get strong enough, we can tend to this vulnerability that will allow us to come into our deepest gifts and our deepest giveaway. We can descend into the reverent dark mystery. That's part of going down under into the underworld, where we go into the dark. The dark can be where our imagination is the most potent, where the images are the most powerful, and they come the most frequently because we're in the dark. There's nothing else. We've let go of our life, and we're now pulled so deeply into the mystery where there's nothing else we can do but just listen for however long it's short and takes to where we're called next. The final chapter in holy longing, play your part in the symphony. It's bringing it back here again to soul and spirit. Soul is our note, our song in the symphony, and we're here to play it, and yet also attuned to the symphony, attuned to the beauty of the music, the fullness of life that's always here, and also attuning to the dissonance, the heartbreak, the ways things are out of balance or out of alignment, attuning to it all and feeling, what in the midst of this is my soul's note to play? I can't answer the question for you, but the journey can. The journey can give you a very personal practice to listen and find your call amidst feeling all of this, what you're here to offer. What are your gifts? And then we head into part 3, the final part of the book, Beloved World, which, you know, I would say for me can, you know, coming back to was one of the more challenging parts of the whole journey. What do I have something to offer? In the final section in Holy Longing, I share a journey that I had with some plant medicine, ayahuasca, where I was struggling with, I don't have anything to offer. You know, I have nothing. I have nothing. And the ayahuasca was incredulous. She was like, seriously? Like, you're just going to sit there? You're a guide. You're not going to offer anything. And, you know, and that and many other conversations were all a part of coming into speaking, to offering, to being with what I'm here to give. A very big part of the journey, and such a big part of continuing the conversation. Conversation can fall flat if we don't give back. The muse, the earth, the dream really wants us to give, to offer back. In Beloved World, I start with wild arrows, because again, coming back to our bodies, part of our giveaway is just our relationship with the world. And wild arrows is such a complicated topic, which I do go into in the book, There's such a complicated relationship with the way the dominant culture presents Eros, and the way that it is inherently in our nature, just this innocent, sensual, physical connection with life, so much bigger than sexuality. It's, it's the touch, it's the smell, it's the contact, it's our physical relationship with the world. And to be in our giveaway, it means being in a sensual relationship like that with the world. In Beloved World, we court the muse. So our muse-directed relationship with life, how can the muse be what directs me in my offering to the world? How can I live a muse-directed life rather than a dominant culture-directed life, or an ego-directed life, or an other-directed life? How can it be my muse that informs what relationships I'm in, what work I do, what creative projects I take on? Pray within the dark earth. It's the next chapter. I was hoping to read a little bit from this one. I'm not quite sure if we totally have time. I think I'll take just a moment to read.
Take your time, Rebecca. Take your
I'll
time.
take just a little time with this. This is a Pray Within the Dark Earth. It's such a complicated topic, but I love this chapter because it really brings in the physical grief situation of where we are in the physical world. How do we be with this grief and these questions and challenges of where we are? And how do we also be with the deeply imaginal? I think of the deeply imaginal as this spring, this endless spring of water that can nourish things. And yet the physical world isn't necessarily an endless spring. We can use up our water, we can take too much, the earth can suffer. So how do we be in this endless imaginal spring of possibilities and also be with the earth grief? And this work of the deep imaginal, Pray Within the Dark Earth, is kind of sitting with that question. So I'll just read a little bit from this, and so you can get a sense of it. I walk through the cave's rocky, wet terrain, placing my hand on a wall to steady myself as my eyes adjust to the dark, pausing. I hear the soft dripping echo of dew sliding off rock. It sounds like a heartbeat from within the cool earthen interior. As water trickles over my feet, I remember watching springs emerge from darkness, rising from under the ground to feed streams, lakes, and rivers. I thank these waters for nourishing all life on the planet. This place reminds me of the cave womb of my mythos. As a guide, I invite others to be nourished by the imaginal waters that spring forth from their depths, releasing visionary potential, expanding consciousness, and revealing other ways to live. Being in our deep imagination, while attuning to nature's imagination, can enlarge our perception, align us with a deep intelligence, and remind us of ancient and new potentialities. Grounded in reverence for the living planet, we can listen for what she needs. Visions and dreams spring forth from the belly of earth, as does actual water, to nourish our souls and the world's soul and keep everything alive. The majority of drinkable water worldwide comes from underground aquifers, now being rapidly drawn down. Rain is unable to replenish the amount being mined. Globally, water use has risen to more than twice the rate of population growth. It is still increasing. 90% of water needed by humans is consumed by industry and agriculture. Groundwater held in caves, pores, and cracks is the world's largest unfrozen freshwater habitat. When these waters are overused, lakes, streams, and rivers dry up, and the animals that live within the underground ecosystems are endangered. In the Navajo Nation in Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, a third of the houses lack running water. In some towns, the figure is 90%. Peabody Energy, a large coal producer and Fortune 500 company, pulled so much water from the Navajo aquifer before closing its mining operation in 2019 that many wells and springs have run dry. And it's not only coal mining that usurps water. Since 1980, lithium mining corporations in Chile have made billions, consuming so much water that indigenous Atacama villagers were forced to abandon their settlements. For millennia, they have used their scarce water supply carefully. Now, where hundreds of flamingos once lived on beautiful lagoons, the ground is hard and cracked. The cave womb of the earth is creative and life-giving, but fragile. As we bring awareness to life underneath the surface, we can grieve and offer our tears for the massive losses of groundwater and the poisoning of underground waterways. We can pray for a vision to help us respond to clear-cut forests, plowed prairies, drained wetlands, and the harms of human-only land use like mining and agriculture. It is hard to bear witness, but we are part of the Earth's body. We need to feel what is happening and seek and offer help. Spirit abides in all living beings and is inseparable from the natural world. To destroy the earth is to desecrate God. Prayer is a way of being present and in relationship with everything. We begin to restore balance when we honor the sanctity of life. By listening to dreams, our muses, and nature, we align ourselves with powerful allies and can glean our purpose and understand how to serve the whole. The harm humans are causing the earth asks us to return to her, to listen, and pray for visions that can help us restore balance. So that's a little bit from the opening of Pray Within the Dark Earth. So that helps take us down into a portal of not only the personal descent, but the cultural descent, the cultural unraveling, and the way cultural unraveling needs to happen, and how we can listen for visions that will take us into a more earth-centered way of living, truly earth-centered way. And also allow the dying to happen and allow the visioning to come, not only personal visioning, but visioning for our whole community, visioning for the whole earth of how we can move forward from this time on the planet, this place where we find ourselves. The last few chapters that I have here towards the end, the next chapter, Engage in Radical Dreaming, takes praying in the dark just a little further, traveling into the study of the environmental movement and how it's failing and what hasn't worked, and how we can still bring ourselves back to the questions of, if we are honoring the earth, that means protecting our land base. That means protecting species. So how do we do that in this world where systems of power are mostly in control, where the laws have all been made against even protesting, against stopping the harm, where it's legal to destroy the earth and illegal to stop it? How do we as citizens built into a world, taught to live in a culture that destroys, how do we do something different? And radical dreaming takes us to a place of actually consulting our dreams, seeding our dreams like a ceremony, and asking questions of our dreams. Just as Robert Bosnak used to talk about in his book Embodiment, about how you can seed dreams for artistic works, and actors or artists or playwrights can ask the dreams for creative power in their creation, that we can also ask the dreams for creative power in our fight to protect the planet, and how to protect lands and species, that we can collectively radically dream. Radically dreaming means radically not just small changes, not just little reforms, but actually radically reimagining what it is to be a human in society and community in relationship to the earth. And then the last two final chapters, Stretch Your Consciousness, takes us again into a journey. Stretch Your Consciousness is really the whole thing of wild yoga. It's really a prayer of listening into stretching our consciousness. And we go a bit further here in stretching our consciousness to the earth, all the different beings of the earth. What would it be like to see the world from their perspective? We go deeper into tree consciousness. We go deeper into shadow, and not only personal shadow, but collective shadow. And also a practice I call reconciling with the goddess, which is also reconciling with the living feminine on the earth, and also the archetypal feminine energies that exist in all of us. How do we reconcile with those energies, call them back into our bodies, back into our lives, back into our world? My ancestors are Norse. I'm part Swedish and come from Norse mythology, where they talk about this reconciling with the sky gods and the nature spirits being such a big part of where our world is today, that spiritually it's happened, but physically it hasn't. And a big part of our work is reconciling this feminine, masculine nature archetypally in the world. The final chapter, Become a Love Warrior for Earth, takes us back to the beginning I talked about with Braveheart. I conversed with my ancestors in Ireland too, and asked them, how did you fight back in those times? How did you revolt against the English, against what was happening? And how do we cause a whole revolution, an ecological revolution with our industrial complex from the spiritual place? How do we revolt? How do we form a new world and be love warriors for the earth? I love the concept of love warrior because it brings both the softness and the love and the listening, the archetypal feminine, and also the action oriented aspects, the fight of the archetypal masculine warrior, love warriors. It's where we all need to go and where these practices, I think, naturally will take us if we want to protect what we love. Sometimes saving something can be looked as bad, and but I look back at myself as a cancer survivor, and the odds were against me when I was 21 of surviving cancer. The odds were 1/3 that the treatment that I was being given would work. This is what the doctors told me, and 2/3 that it wouldn't work. And yet my loved ones, my parents, they fought for me. They tried. And I say that's where we are with the earth, that it's not about the odds. It's about our love. It's about our love. And if we love something, we fight for it, and we fight for it, and we don't really know. We can't really predict the future. All sorts of things can happen. So that takes us into a practice, a full practice of what it can be to move through all the practices of wild yoga in whatever way we want in our journey, and become love warriors for the earth. So I thank you, and wherever these practices lead you, or whichever ones you feel most strongly called to in the book, I imagine that there is a large resource of relationships, that are practices to gain relationship with worlds that we're generally not taught to, that can open up all sorts of new possibilities for your life and for our world. So thank you so much for listening, and open for questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's been an extraordinary discourse, I must say, on everything from wild to yoga. I love your notion of love warriors for the earth. I think that's really, the bottom line under current world conditions. We all have to be out there doing what we're doing on whatever front line at which we find ourselves, with as much love as we possibly can, and compassion for the suffering that our disconnection from nature is causing so many people, and also so many species all around the world. And the fact that you have distilled your wisdom down in the way that you have, and with this book, is quite extraordinary. So I just want to applaud you and acknowledge what you've accomplished. And I'd like to start our conversation by having you talk a little bit more deeply about nature deficit disorder, and what you have observed as you've taken countless people in groups into forests and down rivers and up canyons, and probably are up to the top of mountains in your 20, 30 years of nature experience. How have you personally seen the health-giving effects of nature on people who are suffering from nature deficit disorder? What's been your experience with what happens when you're actually out there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I've worked with all sorts, even very troubled people when I worked in wilderness therapy, who didn't even want to be in the wilderness, to where I mostly have worked now as people who voluntarily come. I think one of the hardest things, probably to begin with, is that people don't often even realize a lot of the people in the world have been raised in cities, or so disconnected from nature in school classrooms, that don't even necessarily realize the healing effects of nature. That was certainly true with young people that were sent to the wilderness. It was always amazing to me to see how most of those young people who went to the wilderness didn't want to be there when they first got there, were very uncomfortable, but by the time it came to leave, they felt so much healthier in themselves that they were afraid to leave. They were afraid to go back because they were afraid to become who they'd been when they were back there, and they had liked who they had become after days and weeks and even months of living in the wilderness and living simply with other humans in community. But I have watched other people who have come to nature shift their life in such major ways, and me included. I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for nature. In fact, I could always say maybe I'd be one of the most troubled people in the world. I've spent a lot of time in nature, as a guide and just personally, and I probably needed it. I need nature's intervention, really a lot to give me more. But when we watch people, well, I'll talk for me personally. Even now, when I go out to nature, and you might notice this, in a world where I live a lot, there's a car, in a house, and there's a computer where I'm working on Zoom with clients or on the phone. When I go out with nature and I'm away from those things, I park my car and it's there, and I go into the wilderness and it's not in my sight, and there's no phones or computers. Just the way I look at the world shifts, just the way my eyes feel shift, and I start looking at water and leaves, and I start seeing things that I don't normally notice if I'm in the midst of the busyness of all that other stuff. And and as I see things, as we digest things through our eyes, the whole body changes, and we digest things through the sound organs of our ears and the sensory, feel of our skin. It changes me. Like, I become in relationship with whoever I am, whether I'm in relationship with my car in rush hour traffic or the computer, or whether I'm in relationship with this forest. And I like how I feel. I like who I am. And most people do. When people go on quests, it's like a highlight of their life. And many times they're torn. Part of them wants to go back to loved ones and certain comforts. And part of them also doesn't want to leave this, moment that they have of being so fully themselves in such an amazing world. But, the visions that we get while we're there to carry back in the world are what give us life. The imagination that can remember where we've been, and in remembering it can bring the wild world back with us, and intentionally bringing back what it says. But it is hard to, I think one of the hardest things about nature deficit disorder is that also when we go out to the wilderness, our brain can still be so hardwired to not actually see the world around us and relate to it. I know it's not uncommon to go out jogging in the morning or for a break, right? Or a little walk for an hour. And it's possible to do that and completely miss the natural world because our minds are still going with the to-do list, or how am I going to deal with that? Or how am I going to deal with this? So let me replay the last meeting. And that's why sometimes extended stays in the wilderness can be really helpful, to just really clear all the other stuff out and allow us to be really present and listening. But certainly if you can, and with these mindfulness practices, the best you can do to empty your mind when you enter the wilderness, to really be present with the other. I always tell people it's a lot like your relationship with a human other. If you sat down with your partner and you were thinking about your last meeting and the meeting to come, and you weren't actually attentive to the relationship, well, that relationship probably wouldn't be so healthy. And it's the same with the earth. When we're with the earth, how can we bring ourselves into a mindfulness connection? And because of our nature deficit disorder, it can be hard to, one, value doing that, and two, to actually be able to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's within that context. I want to talk to you more about trees. As you can see from my background, I love trees and have always had a special relationship with trees. And I find that your remarks about the exceptional intelligence of trees is very astute. And I've been just finishing a book by Peter Wohlleben on the hidden life of trees, the German forester. And it's an extraordinary thing, just how sophisticated and intelligent and empathic and social these trees are. And he was also pointing out that they think they have identified where the brain is in trees, in the roots. And the people at Damanhur, if you know Damanhur community in northern Italy, they believe that trees provide the very special service for the whole planetary ecology of remembering planetary history, and are one of the transfer nodes between the cosmic environment and our planet, so that they're actually not only equally intelligent, they're of deeper service than we are because they're in regular contact with the larger whole. So I just wanted to affirm your special relationship with trees. We've had a guy named Dr. Jim Conway on a number of times, who's a tree whisperer. He lives in Pennsylvania. He'll be on in about a month again, just talking to us about a special relationship with trees. And oftentimes, as I'm sure you know, that we don't need to necessarily experience all of nature in all of her resplendence, but if we just have a special relationship for one aspect, like there's a hill not far from where I live, and at the top of the hill is an oak tree. And whenever I go up to the oak tree, up the hill, I embrace the oak tree and sit in meditation and ask for wise counsel. And I don't really pay attention to any of the other trees, but just the fact that I have this connection with that oak is of special meaning. And I sometimes, when I'm sitting here, I can feel it. I can just sort of resonate with it, even though I can't see it. And so I wanted to bring that in, and other people have special relationships like horse whispers, so that there's all kinds of ways that nature can speak to us. And I think part of wild yoga is how we find a synergistic alignment with one particular aspect that becomes a portal to a larger communion with nature. Does that make sense to you? Do you have a special tree? Do you have a special animal, or do you have a totem? I mean, this is the whole reality of totems, that there's special synergies with one other aspect that opens the whole.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for your love of the forest. I love that book, The Hidden Life of Trees, too. And I love how he goes into all the senses that trees have. Like, that's another thing. People say humans have 5 senses, and trees, they have all these ways of sensing.
Totally.
They're so intelligent. In some ways, I say wild yoga is a way of saying, well, we might have more than 5 senses. What if we did? And what if we can open up to some of those senses, and maybe trees are mentors in that, and how much of the other world and how much detail they can sense about the world around them. But I do agree that I love a simple relationship with one other can open a world to us that we didn't know we had. I'm just reminded, I watched one man who came on a quest that I was guiding, who kind of hadn't talked to nature, just a retired lawyer, was just, like trying, was it in transition, trying this out, never done any kind of nature conversation, really wasn't quite sure he believed it, even the whole time, went out on his solo. And he had a communion with a butterfly. Every day, the butterfly returned to him at the same time. And it became his deceased mother, that he could feel some kind of communication coming through it. And he didn't, it happened, and then he would doubt it. And then it happened the second day, and then he doubted, he was like, well, but it was powerful. And then he doubted. And then by the third day, he's like, oh my God, I can't doubt this anymore. It's happening. And I think that's the nature of experiential practices and connections. In wild yoga, I didn't talk about this, but at the end of every chapter, there's a bunch of practices. It's not just a philosophy like, here, believe what I'm saying. It's actually, no, like, go out and try the practices. That's what we do in all the guiding that I do. Go out and have your own relationships and see what happens, find your own truth. But finding that relationship with that one other nature being does open up a world to us, which does change. And like you said, it's with us always in our imagination. for me with trees was big. I apprenticed to certain particular trees, that probably a juniper tree that I lived by for many years, that was maybe a 20-minute walk from my house, but out in a national forest, far off any trail, was a big teacher to me in my life, as well as some other trees too.
Now, how did you find the juniper?
Well, I was doing some dream work, and in the dream, I had stolen these magic potatoes from a girl in my dream, and I did all this dream work with this girl, and I got some potatoes, and I wrote a letter, and I was doing this ceremony to give back the magic potatoes that I'd taken to this other, and so the dream work carried me into this particular juniper tree to give back these potatoes, and I buried the potatoes underneath the tree and had read the letter and had a whole conversation. This was a beautiful juniper tree. It was actually half alive and half dead, very old. And suddenly, after I just, when you do ceremonies with the earth in dream work, you just don't know what's going to happen next. And suddenly, after the ceremony was over, I was just transported into this fascinating relationship with this tree, which went on for years. I could probably write a book about just that relationship, but it was so personal. I don't know if I could share everything, because it's so it was so magnificent, and that tree really healed me and brought me to life in ways that are just inexplicable. And I don't live next to that tree anymore. It was in Utah when I lived in southern Utah, but I do carry that tree with me always, because it's such a deep relationship. Just like you said, it's always there for me when I need to remember to come back into a feeling of love in myself and in the community of the belonging of the natural world.
I had a similar experience in France back in 2005. We were taking a group of our doctoral students on a pilgrimage to retrace the steps of Mary Magdalene, and when we got to Chartres at the end of the trip, there was a shaman woman named Pila Colorado that woke up in the morning and just announced at breakfast that the only thing that was important for us to do that day was to find the mother tree. And it was hot. I was slightly irritated. And I said, well, why don't we just look outside into the courtyard? And she says, no, it's not there. And so the group, I had no idea what was happening. We started to walk down the hill in Chartres, and I kept pointing out different trees that looked perfectly okay to me. And she kept saying, no, 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 no. And 20 minutes later, crossing the Our River, she found a sycamore, and as soon as she saw it, she says, that's the tree. That's the tree. And it was at that tree that I had an encounter that really stopped my world in a very powerful way. And out of that came our annual pilgrimages that we've made for 18 years now to Chartres and the mother tree. Every year we go back to the mother tree. It's an extraordinary thing when, as you're saying, and I really wanted to emphasize that, because trees are so wise and they're so compassionate, that they really are mentors if we just stop long enough to sit with our back against them and just get really, really quiet. And so I want to just acknowledge your voice for the trees. And I'd like to just turn also to dreams, because Carlos Castaneda and his corpus of material under the mentorship of Don Juan Matus, talks about dreaming. One of his last books is The Art of Dreaming. And I would want to open that up in terms of your own experience, because what Don Juan says and what Carlos experienced was that when you dream, it's not just subjective, recapitulation of the day, but if you're intentional about your dreams, you can actually enter into other universes. and live lives in other universes all through your dreaming. So I would love to just hear you go more deeply into your own experience of dreams and what has really opened up for you through your dream life, because you're absolutely correct. As Freud said, dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, and the unconscious is what contains it all. So whatever can get us access to that unconscious content that carries the memory of the entire manifest universe is a very precious tool and guide.
Mhm. Thank you for asking about dreams. I love to honor dreams as part of wilderness. When when our ancestors lived close to the earth, sharing dreams was like the news of the day. It wasn't like turning on, the talk show or reading the newspaper to catch up what's happening. It was just listening to the dream world. And so this way of honoring the dream world as like a key important thing to be listening to is central to me, to just the honoring of the dream, even though I say that dreams, even though I've been studying them for 20 years, are ever mysterious. And I don't know if I can fully wrap my head around, well, what the heck is this? People always say, by the way, who's the dream maker anyway? And I'm not sure I know, who is the dream maker? This being that's more powerful and intelligent than I am. Dreams feel like they do come from the earth. There feels like a synergy between what the dreams are telling me, what the earth's telling me oftentimes. So the wildness of the earth and the wildness of dreams feels connected. I think there are other worlds, multiple lives that we get carried into. Even though I've been studying dreams for 20 years and have, through my own listening, through work that I do all the time with individual clients and groups, and having studied with, Robert Bosnak, with Bill Plotkin, with Stephen Eisenstadt, and also with Robert Moss, I still feel, and having read all the books that I could read on dreams, I still feel like I can't actually say totally, what are dreams or where do they come from?
Yeah.
Can't totally wrap my figure around it.
Deep
But
mysteries, deep mysteries.
deep mysteries. It's like it's kind of like being invited into the ocean, right? We can feel the currents around us, maybe see the wildlife that's there, and as we move about it, and we can feel that it's so vast and it's such a big world, with multiple smaller worlds in it, and it's so much bigger than us, and it feels so important to be a part of it. But could I describe some words that would wrap myself around it fully? I feel a challenge to that. But I
Yeah.
enter this current of mystery that I'm so deeply in love with and in awe of. I always say with clients, if we do dream work rather than just hear whatever's on your personal agenda, we're probably going to go far deeper with the dream work, because the mystery always knows where to take us more than we do, to these places that are more true and kind of somewhat unconscious to our mind, that are maybe more important for us to be with. I feel like dreams are, I always say to people in my programs, if God whispered to you, or the goddess whispered to you every night in your dreams and gave you personal advice about your life, would you listen? Well, she does. She does whisper to us every night. That's our dreams. The images that we get are our personal invitation.
Yeah.
Pay attention to this.
Yeah.
Be here. Experience this. See what happens if you go there. And then when we say yes to it, whatever this it is, some people say, I know Robert Johnson said in Inner Work, we're dialoguing with parts of ourselves. And then when we study Bosnak, we get introduced to the idea of dream work as embodied image, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with us per se, but is just these wild images of the universe. And yes, and yes. And so stay open. A lot of the dream work that I've done, because I've worked with the Animas Valley Institute my whole life, is listening for soul, that soul, our mythopoetic, can speak through our dreams, that we can have
Totally.
mythic dreams.
Totally.
And dreams can be so much more too. We can talk to the dead, we can see the future, we can revisit the past. So I'm always listening and careful not to make too many judgments too quickly about what this is, but always trying to listen. I always tell people when I work with their dreams, I'm not working for you, I'm working for the dream maker. I'm trying to help you experience whatever the dream maker wants. So
That's great. I'm not working for you. I'm working for the dream maker. That is amazing. Well, in Chartres, one of the things that happened was the same shaman that introduced us to the mother tree opened up to dreaming. So when we started our annual pilgrimages, she began to channel collective dreaming. So we've been collectively dreaming in Chartres for 18 years, and it's been so extraordinary to come to an awareness that dreams aren't necessarily personal, that if a group is together, like on a vision quest that you've taken, the dreams can create, that they're all having, can create a container. And we've experienced actual prescience, like in 2019, the dreams that we had in July of 2019 were indicating death, darkness. There was a couple dreams of epidemics. And then the pandemic hit in early 2020, and we were pondering in 2019, what could this possibly mean? And we've had several examples, incontrovertible, like your lawyer with the butterfly, that when people collectively hold their dreaming while they're going through a powerful initiatory process, that the collective dreaming becomes the container, and deep wisdom and both personal and collective can ensue. And so I imagine you've had your own experiences with collective dreaming.
yeah, sometimes it happens just naturally, like you say. If I'm on a quest or program and I'm just listening to people's individual dreams for their soul's journey, what can come through is that there's collective themes, multiple themes in similar dreams, or that my own dreams are having themes along with the group,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
that somebody shares a dream in the group and everyone is affected by it. In other words, they brought this dream back. It got experienced through them, but everybody else is experiencing it as they share it out loud. And then there are group experiences, like I guide a program called Prayers in the Dark, which is very connected to the chapter I read to you, where there's an intentional dreaming. There's a seeding of the dream, like, let's collectively dream for the world here. What if we listen to our dreams?
Mm.
And keep in mind our mythopoetic purpose. It could be in there too, because that can show up
Mhm.
anywhere and be part of the collective dreaming, but also really open the dream world as if we're listening for the collective dream here that's happening, and how we all might be influenced by any particular person's dream.
Rebecca Wildbear, everyone. You're amazing, Rebecca. I love the I love the line. I'm not working for you. I'm working for the dream maker. That's priceless. That's priceless. So as we close our session today, I would love to just have you either give us a wilderness blessing or some words of wise counsel to our community, any way that you would like to make a final expression of wild yoga.
Well, great. I just want to say, yeah, thanks for coming, and thanks for your love of the wild and learning and growing and listening. And wherever you are in the journey, whatever difficulties or ordeals or wounds or history you have or people I do believe that there are practices and pathways that can bring us all back in the right direction, can bring each human and us culturally, that it's certainly worth an effort, right? To come back into balance. And so I just applaud you and celebrate you for being here, and invite you to come into your body, to maybe even after this class to take a moment, to go outside for 5 or 10 minutes and close your eyes and be in your deep imagination with the earth, and listen and touch physically nature, speak of your love of nature, remember your love, remember your past out loud with nature, your favorite beings in nature, celebrate them as well as the ones right there, and just let yourself listen. It's amazing what can come through in just a momentary connection that you might go out and make right now. So I wish you well in that diving in and that listening. And I will I'm going to write my email in the my website, which has my email in it, in the in the subtext chat. You'll see RebeccaWildbear.com. That's my website. If you want to stay in touch with me, my email's on it. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, or you want to continue the conversation, or you want to learn more about me, my work, my programs, my book, how to get the book. So stay in contact, and nice to be with you, and wish you well.
Thank you, Rebecca, so much. You've brought you've like the balm of Gilead, as they say in the scriptures. You brought solace to my soul today. It's been so heartwarming because you so deeply embody what you're speaking about, and that's just where the deepest wisdom lies. So I just want to acknowledge you and say how precious you are, and the work that you're doing in terms of taking people back to who and what they most essentially are, is the great work of our time. And you do it with skill and heart and real elegance. So I just want to acknowledge you and recommend your book, Wild Yoga, to all of us today. And that'll bring us to a close, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat. Rebecca, I hope you can join us if you have time. You'll see the link in the chat box. And then we will see you all tomorrow, where we'll have a conversation with Jeff Dunn on some of the latest advances in psychic research and human empowerment. It's extraordinary what Rebecca said, that the trees and the plants have all these psychic powers that humans have too. But somehow when we separated ourselves from nature, we lost that capacity. So how we regain the psychic empowerment to allow us to commune with a tree or with someone distant is what we're going to be discussing tomorrow, because these are faculties that all of us possess in the depths of our soul. And our communion with nature enables us to animate and become more whole, so we can become more like the trees. Thank you, Rebecca. Wonderful session. Wonderful session.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to be with you, with your love of trees too, and really appreciate your joy in this conversation. And thanks so much for having me.
Bye, everyone.